Hi guys, I'm Comp Civics, and I'm a tester on Marlowe's, and in this sword guide I'll teach you everything that I know about sword PvP, and everything I've learned from fighting against a lot of the high tier players. Also, before we begin, I'd like to credit yuval because I got a lot of my clips from him, and 15 Acorn for helping me record some of the clips in the guide. Before we get into the video, I'd like to give some general knowledge to help understand what's going on in the video a bit more. Your reach is partially tied to your momentum, so when you move forward, you have more range than your opponent. I like audience retention, so here are the knockback rules, and I'm not going to read them out loud. When you're sprinting and you hit your opponent, your knockback gets reduced by 40%, and this allows you to start a combo. You've probably heard of this like 1,000 times, but I'll just go over it anyways. Only your first sprint hit will deal sprint hit knockback, and after that you need to reset your sprint to deal the full amount of knockback. When you're comboing someone, there's 3 things that can go wrong: your sprint hitting, distance, and timing. It's really easy to fix the sprint hitting problem. Basically, you need to make sure you're W tapping and you're actually hitting when you're holding W. If you don't reset your sprint, you're going to sweep. So if you see any sweep marks, it means that you're sprint hitting wrong. The other thing you have to look out for in your combos is your spacing. If your opponent is able to hit you back, it probably means you're spacing too close to your opponent. And if your opponent escapes your combos really easily, or you just lose your combo, it's probably because you're playing too passively with your spacing, and your opponent is going out of your reach. The other thing you have to look out for in your combos is the timing. You can see how when I'm comboing this guy, when I hit fast, he tends to be farther, but as I slow down my hits, he gets closer. The faster your hits, the more stun you're going to get, and the slower your hits, the less stun you're going to get. If you hit too fast, you're going to end up hitting your opponent while they're falling. And also, on multiplayer servers, if you don't charge your attack enough, their knockback just freezes. There are 2 types of W-tap combos. You have the pausing W-tap combos, where you W-tap but slightly slower, and this gives the least amount of stun. And then you have the normal W-tap combos, and this gives slightly more stuns. And both these combos allow you to follow up after your opponent backs out. S-tapping gives the most amount of stun, however, you don't really get any follow-up potential because when you hold S, you kind of lose all of your momentum. However, they can still counter jump resets, which is really nice. And they're really good against opponents who tend to not back out of your combo. You should vary your combo depending on what your opponent does. Like here, I notice he's starting to move back, so I slow down my timing and do pausing W taps. The reason why people don't tend to strafe is because when you strafe, you deviate from a straight line, and that means you apply less resistance force. Essentially, it just means that you take more knockback when you strafe. However, the same thing applies to dealing more knockback. When you strafe, your opponent also deviates from a straight line, and this means that your hits will do more knockback. This is why it's a great idea to strafe in your combos. It makes it harder for your opponent to hit you, and you just deal more knockback. I don't know, I just thought this movement was good, so here's more clips of strafe combo movement. Okay, I'm like far too lazy to get like more footage of movement, but essentially, the closer you are to your opponent, the harder it is to aim. So strafing in a close range is a really good idea. You take more knockback, but that doesn't really matter because you're close, and it just affects your opponent's aim so much. You can also use it when you try to 3-block or bait because you'll deal more knockback and you'll be way harder to hit. Another way you can utilize your movement is repositioning, which is essentially just another way to say change your position in a way that gives you a stun hit. And you'll see this a lot against Nokb crits and when you're S-critting. A counter by itself will not win you the game. It's not really a win condition. Counters are meant to be a way to get out of a bad situation while taking minimal damage. W release crits are the most common type of crits, and it's essentially just critting while jumping. And you'll see this a lot in PvP Legacy against people who crit spam. W release crits are going to be countered by crit deflects, where you sprint hit them after they land so they don't take decreased falling knockback. And after your crit deflect, you should look for some sort of combo or punish to when your opponent gets knocked back. Counter to crit deflections is the Nokb crit, where you basically just crit and you hold W, and you're not supposed to jump, by the way, because otherwise you take increased knockback. Then from there you have two follow-up options. You're able to do the sprint hit follow-up, which beats double crits but loses to Nokb crits. And you have Nokb crit into P crit, which does give you free damage, but it does lose to double crits, but it goes even against Nokb crits. And when you're out of range, you should go for a sprint hit. Double crits are a really good answer to Nokb crits. Basically, you just P crit and then you jump up for another crit. And this second crit can either be a Nokb crit or a standard crit. Another really good idea is to sort of strafe when you do a double crit, because when you're close to your opponent, it's really hard to aim, and you can oftentimes get a lot of free hits off this. P crits are going to be outtraded by standard crits, and this is because when you're P critting, you have to wait for your opponent to hit you, so standard crits are going to come out faster. And this also means that W release crits are going to outtrade double crits. You should only really throw out double crits when you know what your opponent's actually going to do, because they can be countered in so many different ways, and all of these counters do a lot of damage. SL crit deflects are another really good answer to an Nokb crit, and the reason why is because after your SL crit deflect, you can start a combo, which is way more rewarding than double crits. And all you really have to do is crit deflect, but you S-tap after it. And what this does is it gives you enough stun against the Nokb crit. S-hold crit deflects lose to falling sprint hits because you get stunned, while if you were to crit deflect, you would be able to hit select them for a combo. Also not a really good option to W release crits, and the reason why is because when you S-tap, you lose all of your momentum, and that completely limits all follow-up potential you have. As you might know, if you don't reset your sprint, you're able to crit while sprinting, and a lot of people struggle against sprint critters. However, the counter to sprint critters are the exact same. If you're going for a W release crit, you crit deflect, and if it's a Nokb crit, you double crit. When you Nokb crit, you can actually react to what your opponent's doing, and this is known as a P crit reaction. So all you really have to do is Nokb crit, and as soon as your opponent's timing slows down, they're going for a P crit, and you can counter whatever they're going to do. So there are two variations of this. The double crit reaction, where you sprint hit them before they can land the second crit in the double crit. However, because the double crit reaction is essentially just deflecting the P crit, it's going to be countered by Nokb crits. The second variation is the Nokb crit reaction. So if your opponent adapts to your double crit reactions by continuing to Nokb crit, you can outtrade them by going for a double crit reaction. If you don't know what your opponent's going to do, you should go for a crit deflection. It's the safest option, and it gives you a lot of information on your opponent. If your crit deflects aren't working, it means they're going for a Nokb crit, and that's where you can switch it up. If you go for a double crit and predict wrong, you're going to get out-critted. But if you go for a crit deflection and your prediction's wrong, you only trade a sprint hit for a crit. When your crit deflect doesn't work, it's a really good idea to switch over to a double crit, and this is because you should be mixing up all of your options, and when people Nokb crit, they tend to want to stay inside of that chain. Jump resets are best used at a mid distance when your opponent is trying to land a stun hit on you, and it puts you in a really good position to do stuff. And you can also use jump resets to jump reset out of a combo. KB combos where you jump reset their sprint hit, and it's really good against people who have predictable hit timing. And they're really nice because they counter both double crits and deflections. Against double crits, when you jump reset, it puts you in a position similar to W release crit where you just outtrade them, and the jump reset just prevents you from getting stunned by their deflection. You're able to do a Nokb combo in the middle of your Nokb crit chain, or switch over to Nokb crit while you're doing a Nokb combo. You can counter the Nokb combo by delaying your hit timing and going for a pcrit into a crit deflection, which also is a way to alter the hit timing. When you're learning jump resets, something you can do is use the Feather client jump reset module to see your timing. Another thing you can do is actually turn on damage tilt so you can look at VOD reviews and see if your timing is off. Big hits are when you attack before your sword is 90% charged, and they have two main use cases: stopping your opponent's knockback before they get out of your range, and this allows you to create a stun combo on them, and also getting free extra damage. When you use crouch dodges correctly, it's very low risk because you can't really punish it. It's best used when you're forced into a bad position, or when you're at like 1 HP and you're gonna die anyways, so you might as well throw it out. In this case, Stinky is one-shot, while Janek has enough HP to tank more than one sprint hit. And because of this, we know that Janek's probably going to leave with a sprint hit, because it's just by far the safest option. So the only thing Stinky can really do is avoid the sprint hit. And he was able to do so with the crouch dodge. And the crouch dodge didn't put him at any more risk, because he would have lost anyways if he weren't to crouch dodge. Another scenario where crouch dodges are low risk are when you're going for 3 blocks, because your opponent can't really punish that. They're going to be really effective for crits because when people crit, they aim for your head, and the same thing will apply to falling sprint hits too. When your opponent adapts to your crouch dodge, they're forced to aim lower, which significantly reduces their reach. The best use case of an uppercut is to surprise your opponent with offbeat timing. Typically, you're going to use it when your opponent is in the air, and this is a really good mix-up because the falling sprint hit is a lot more common, but that takes a lot more time to execute. You can also use it to extend your combo. Turn back movement is like holding S on steroids because you move back way faster. However, you can't see your opponent when you do this. Most scenarios where holding S is a viable option, turn back movement is also good. You can also fake your turn back movement and go for a crit. A punish sweep is where you sweep the hit select, and this puts your opponent in a bad position to hit select, allowing you to start a combo and counter. You can throw this out in neutral by not resetting your sprint, allowing you to punish sweep while holding W. And you can combine this with the follow-up sweep to extend your combo even further. Follow-up sweeps are where you don't reset your sprint and you predict your opponent to back out of your combo and you continue to sweep them. And the reason why they're so strong is because they beat two of the most common options. If your opponent moves back, then you can just continue to sweep them. But if your opponent tries to sprint hit you, you can hit select them. Side sweep is where you hold A or D and you sweep, and they're going to be useful against people who tend to play aggro and Nokb crits. Against these aggro players, it's going to be a lot harder to stun them, and also side sweep is just a really low risk and high reward move. If your move fails, you just end up trading a sweep for a crit, which isn't too bad, but if it's successful, you're going to be able to land some free crits on your opponent. Another way to utilize sweeps is to go for a sweep combo, and the reason why they're so broken is that it's really hard to aim against, because aim is primarily based on predictions, and sweeps are a mix-up for this, and you're going extremely close to your opponent, so it's just like really hard to aim. And if your opponent does manage to sprint hit you, you can just punish sweep them and start a combo. After you know your opponent's going to adapt to your sweep, you should mix it up with something else. I like to go for sprint hits because after they use the sweep knockback, it just completely throws off their aim. But you can also go for crits. A back sweep is what's known as a crit trade counter. Essentially, a crit trade counter is when you and your opponent are in the air at the same time, and you stun your opponent when they try to W release crit. And this can be done in the first crit in an exchange too. What you're going to want to do is you let your opponent hit you, you hold S, and then using deflection timing, you try to sweep your opponent, and this allows you to start a combo, granting you the hit advantage. Falling sprint hits are literally where you sprint hit while falling, and they're commonly used to extend your combos. They're also really good against baiters because your momentum is tied to your reach, so when you go for a falling sprint hit, you'll outreach your opponent. They can also be used as a mix-up to prevent your opponent from critting. Falling sprint hits can also be used as a crit trait counter similar to backsweep, which will be elaborated later on in the video. The difference between a falling sprint hit and a backsweep is that the falling sprint hit deals more knockback. This means that against low ping players, you're going to want a backsweep to prevent them from getting knocked away before you can combo them, and against high ping players, you want a falling sprint hit because it deals more knockback. Crit trait is like a rock, paper, scissors game. W release crits are counted by falling sprint hits. Falling sprint hits are counted by Nokb crits. KB crits are countered by W release critting. You have to treat S crits a bit differently. So in a trade, people will try to exit out by going for an S crit, in which case you need to get close to your opponent. Against people who tend to build distance with an S crit, you can go for a P crit, and this brings you closer to your opponent, allowing you to close the distance, and typically after, people like to follow up with a double crit. People will try to S crit into reposition to start a combo, however, this can be countered by sprint hitting them while they reposition. Normally against S critters, a sprint hit is a bad idea because they get knocked away. However, when people go for S crit into reposition, they're going to be walking inside your distance again. Also, when people S crit, they do it at a longer range, which makes them susceptible to either S critting yourself or moving back before they can S crit you. In a crit trade, you're going to be close to your opponent, so movement will be a really good option here. Inside of a combo, you can either jump reset or hold S, and you can also jump while holding S to take even more knockback. There's also turn back movement, but that's kind of gay, and no one really likes that. Jump resets are higher risk but higher reward, and S holding is just more consistent. However, when your opponent S taps, then jump resets are not going to be a good option because with good spacing, you just can't jump reset that. However, when your opponent follows up, then holding S is a bad idea because they can punish that. One thing to look out for when you're doing your combos is making sure you know when your opponent will back out, and if you're able to successfully predict your opponent from backing out, then you just win the game. Here are the things you can do to extend your combo, and it doesn't really matter, it's just up to your own personal preference. In a neutral position, you and your opponent don't really have an advantage. This is typically at a longer distance. And the main things you're going to look for is a way to get first hit and a way to start a combo. When your opponent goes for a crit, you have three options. You can crit them yourself, which isn't necessarily losing, but it's also not winning. And then you can go for 3 blocks. 3 blocks are really nice. Even if you fail your 3 block, you'll get a double hit, which is still winning because you have hit advantage. And this is a double hit from the enemy perspective. And as you can see, if you jump for a crit at a longer range, your enemy will be able to double hit you because at a longer range, you'll be closer to the ground. And the last option you can do is baiting. However, you shouldn't really spam this because otherwise your opponent will be able to punish this. At a close distance, you're going to want to look for sprint hits. And this is because if you jump up for a crit, then you're just going to get 3 blocked. But at a longer range, when you go for crits, you're going to be falling, and this makes it significantly harder for your opponent to 3 block you. And also, at the longer distance, you can look for baits, because now you're in baiting distance. Typically, you're going to want to lead with crits, because they give you a lot more options, and they're just more reward. When you're fighting baiters, you want to keep these things in mind. Your momentum equals your reach, and falling sprint hits are going to be your best friend. When they go for crits, you go for a falling sprint hit to prevent them from landing it. And if they continue to hold S, you'll be able to outreach them with a falling sprint hit. Just watch out, because if they try to go back in, they'll be able to hit select you. You can also go for a double jump, which builds momentum to make it harder for your opponent to sprint hit and bait you. The double jump movement is great because it forces your opponent to act unless they want to be in a disadvantaged position. You should mix up your double jumps because otherwise your opponent will be able to know exactly when you come in. You can mix up your double jumps by only going for one jump and also baiting and sprint hitting your opponent instead of critting. You can also consider playing more defensive yourself and more specifically staying grounded, and this is because it's just miles easier to bait a crit than it is to bait a sprint hit, and when you're playing defensive, you're taking their advantage away. When you're up on HP, you should almost never go in with a crit, and this is because if you go in for a crit, you can either get baited, deflected, or just knocked away and get comboed to oblivion and lose your HP advantage. Something that QZ does is he leads with sprint hits, but he jumps whenever his opponent jumps, and this allows him to be safe while still not getting out-traded when his opponent jumps for a crit. And pretty much the opposite thing applies at an HP disadvantage. You're going to be wanting to stay at a long distance and go for crits and baits and try to combo your opponent. The main thing you're going to want to avoid is exchanging sprint hits with your opponent because that's just a losing battle. And when you're down on HP, you can just throw out crouch dodges as a sort of Hail Mary because you're going to die anyways. Thank you guys for sticking to the end of my video. If you have any questions, just let me know. And I've linked the guide server in the description. And I'll also link a training hub server so you can get some free coaching. And yeah, thank you guys for watching. Please subscribe. I worked on this for too long.